Honesty is the best policy, and honesty saves everyone's time. And when you're like not genuine or hiding something, it really weighs you down. I have my own stories of coming out that I would love to share because I think storytelling is really what connects us as people. The coming out process, I mean, everyone's story is different. Everyone has different things to consider when they are coming out. But, it's something that I've always been very passionate about.
Welcome, everyone. Got another beautiful episode of the One Moment Podcast. We have a very special and distinguished guest today. Her name is Miss Kim Neat, and she is a licensed therapist in the state of New York, and here to talk about some very important topics, continuing to break stigmas and barriers across the board. That is our goal. That is our mission. And we are here to just provide education to the public. So listen, we're going to be talking about potentially heavy things. If anything comes up and you are triggered while watching this, please reach out and seek help. You have 988, which is the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline. You also have local crisis centers and local emergency departments. Please feel free to utilize your resources. You can also use Psychology Today to see if you can find a therapist that you feel like you can connect with in your local area. Now, Miss Kim, I am so glad to have you on board today and to have you here. And in the email, there was a lot of topics that we could talk about, of course, and I don't think we've had one yet on LGBTQIA plus. I think I said that right. So yeah, like there's so many things to really discuss with that, with that population, with that group. So I'm gonna hand the torch off to you, let you pick it up, and we're going to see where this is going to go because I am interested in talking about it, learning more personally and professionally about the LGBTQIA plus population.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yeah. When we talk about the LGBTQIA community, that's kind of an umbrella. There's so many different things you could talk about under that one umbrella. The topic, I should say, that came to mind for me is, coming out, the coming out process. I mean, everyone's story is different. Everyone has different things to consider when they are coming out. Um, October 10th is known as National Coming Out Day, and that's not a recent thing. Like, I remember that when I was a teenager, like 15, 16 years ago. So this isn't a new national day because I know they make national days for everything. But it's something that I've always been very passionate about. Being a clinician, being what I would call the therapist friend my whole life, people have always confided in me. And, like I have my own stories of coming out that I would love to share because I think storytelling is really what connects us as people. It's not just like clinical textbook information. I think when you put a story and a face to a concept or topic, it makes it more personal and easier to connect to. Um, so I would love to share my many stories of my own experience, just so like if somebody's contemplating coming out or wanting to share that with a select few people in their lives, like how I went about it. Not saying that's the right or wrong way, but just to give some food for thought, I guess.
And when you talk about coming out, I appreciate the topic around that. When we talk about coming out, the first thing that comes to my mind is living authentically.
Hmm.
Carl Rogers and many of the greatest theorists in the psychology and counseling field talked about living authentically.
Hmm.
If we're not living authentically, are we really being true to ourselves? That's the
Yeah,
first thing that comes to my mind.
yeah, and that's a really good point. Like I was thinking about this. Since I live in this city, I was walking to Whole Foods to get some cereal for the weekend, and I was thinking about like, you know, what makes us like feel really scared as people. And I think like one of those things that makes us like fearful about just life in general is when we're not living authentically. It's like, I mean, I'm somebody who like I would like to think I'm a pretty honest person, generally speaking. And something I don't remember where I heard this line, this tagline, but honesty is the best policy, and honesty saves everyone's time. And when you're honest, you don't have to remember as much. And I know as a clinician, I'm thinking about a lot of different things. Like, I don't have time to remember a fabricated story that I'm trying to create. And when you're like being not genuine or hiding something, it really weighs you down. It's like you're walking around with like a 50-pound weight on your shoulders. It's a huge burden to carry to not be able to live authentically. And of course, there are some nuance and some considerations that I'm sure we'll get into. Um, but yeah, like one of the like best things in my life was when I was able to come out and feel like I could live genuinely, honestly for the first time.
It's interesting you shared that because one of my best friends who died about, I think it was July the 11th of 2021, he was gay. And he told me, he was like, Kev, I appreciate you so much because in our relationship with one another, you have allowed me to be who I am without having to wear a mask in public, right? Like I can just be myself around you. Whereas in my job and everything that I do, I literally am not able to be me. I have to put on this mask and this facade that, the society accepts.
Mhm,
And he was never able to, I guess you could say, come out in my interpretation of it.
mhm.
And so my question is, I share that because my question is you mentioned this burden, feeling this burden of this weight holding us down. When or what does that burden look like?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. Like, I think, growing up, I mean, I'm a child of the 90s and early 2000s. That was my childhood and adolescent years. There wasn't a lot of representation during that time. So you had like nothing to really like model relationships, or you didn't even have TV characters really. Like you may have had like Ellen, who is a controversial figure, lover or hater. Like that was kind of like the only like sort of out representation I had. And that burden kind of looks like, like faking your way through life. Like I remember like specifically middle school, high school, having like kind of pretend crushes. I feel like that's very common. You kind of like, for me, pick a boy who seemed nice enough and that like maybe you could date, but it's not like you really had any interest in truly dating that person. I know, like, people, like, have those kind of inauthentic relationships, and sometimes they don't really even realize they're not authentic until later. Like, people also kind of have some realizations later in life. But it's just like, not ever feeling true connection. Like, I remember like so many people like dating in middle school and high school. And I did get to have like the high school experience actually, like more so like later in high school. But it was also in secrecy. So it's just like the burden of not being able to like share like I'm in love with this person and I'm happy. Like that's like one of the true joys of life. And to not be able to have that is just it's just very heavy. And your friend also reminds me like I don't remember exactly where I saw the statistic, so don't fully quote me on this because I can't tell you the exact resource. It may be Trevor Project, it may be GLAD, but, to have at least one supportive person in your life, as a queer person I think reduces, suicide ideation by, like, 40%. I'm pretty sure that came from GLAAD, but I don't 100% remember. And, I was looking at, Trevor Project stats before hopping on here today, and, LGBT youth are 5 times more likely to, attempt suicide than heteronormative youth. So it's just like this heaviness that is really carried around, and just having a supportive person, I think definitely reduces that. And um, I was really lucky to have glimmers of that throughout life too. Like, I'm sure he might end up listening to this, but my oldest brother has always been one of my biggest supporters, role models, cheerleaders, sometimes a person to butt heads with. And I remember this moment like clear as day. Being from Lexington, Kentucky, we were in my brother's car on Nicholasville Road, driving to the mall. I think it was around Christmas time, and I think he must have been buying a present or something for my sister-in-law, who was his girlfriend at the time. They weren't engaged yet. And just out of nowhere, like, this was very unprompted, like, hadn't been dating anyone yet, hadn't been, um, like, even giving any sort of, like, hints that I was, in the queer community, and he just said, like, out of nowhere, "You know that you can tell me anything and I won't judge you for it." And, that's something that really, really meant a lot, even though, like, I was the annoying younger sister and just kind of like an annoying teen at that moment and kind of didn't really say a whole lot. But it was something that, like, I knew he was always going to be one of my North Stars because he really did genuinely mean that, and he has always followed through with that promise. Like, there have been a lot of things that I've told him, or even, like, we've challenged each other on, and at the end of the day, like, he gave, like, the best, like, wedding speech because of this. He was always my shoulder to lean on, and, he would always say, "Tough times don't last." And he even reiterated that during the wedding speech that he gave, for me and my wife last year. And, just having that person, really, really does make a difference. So sometimes, like, and when we talk about coming out, we think about telling everyone at one time, but sometimes that can mean telling one trusted person.
And what does that support person look like? What does that and what I mean by that is like, what does it entail as far as when we talk about a support system or support network?
I mean, and I think it's definitely personal to everyone, because, we think we know somebody, and sometimes we get things wrong, unfortunately. But, I think it's the person who always continues to show up for you no matter what. And doesn't necessarily mean like in an LGBT context. I'm also talking about like if you have a flat tire at 3 a.m. and that's going to be your person to call, that's probably going to be a very trusted person. And, like, I remember, like, telling my childhood best friend, like, in my many iterations of coming out, because that's also an issue, like, when you come out once, sometimes you have to come out, like, 10 different times, and I'm sure we'll get to that. Um, but, like, my childhood best friend was like, I've known since you were 4, like, it's not a surprise to me. So I think it's, like, the people who, like, see you and your good, bad, and ugly and still love and support you anyway. I would say those are generally, like, pretty safe, people to confide in. Like I said, like, it's not 100% foolproof, but generally speaking.
Now, I have to ask, okay, because a lot I think there's a myth to it, and I don't think it's accurate information that, some in the general public know, or I don't yeah, that or I don't think it's accurate information that, people in the general public believe or think. I've worked with many folks in my career, and a lot of what they say, or depending on who it is, let me emphasize that, depending on who it is, their theory behind how someone is part of the LGBTQIA uh, group is that they the reason and I'm gonna just throw it out there, right? And I'm gonna paraphrase what they said, or what the typical statement is. Well, that person's gay because they have trauma in their childhood. That person's lesbian because she has trauma in their childhood, or this person's transgender because they have trauma in their childhood, right? And it all goes back to trauma their in their thought process. Now, I'd like to be the myth buster. Is there any truth to that as far as being across the board, everybody or most people then not in the LGBTQ population, or what? Help educate us a little bit.
Sure. And I mean, obviously, I can't speak to everyone's experience, but I know mine. Well, also, I know just with an undergrad in psychology and a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, that I've not come across that in any of the research. So that's not a fact that we learn in school. But also, like with my own experience, like I am very lucky that I haven't experienced any large forms of trauma. Like the most traumatic experience I can say I've had was probably coming out to my mom and her not being accepting. But like I grew up with a mom, a dad, two brothers, had a normal childhood where I went to school, I played sports, played with Barbies, also played with a baseball bat, or really softball bat. I played baseball and softball. Like I would say I had like the typical American upbringing. I was raised Catholic, went to church every Saturday. Um, so nothing in my childhood points to like I am this way because of trauma. And, something I did learn actually as a psych major in undergrad, and it was in, I think, childhood development. And I wish I had the textbook with me. Unfortunately, it's in my stuff in Kentucky that will eventually make its way here. But, sometimes kids know by around like age 4 that there's something different about them. They might not have the vocabulary, the words, or to know what it exactly means. They just know like there's something different. And, you know, I feel like that is true for me as well. Like I knew that I would get like, kind of like the shy feeling around girls. I wouldn't around boys. I didn't know what that meant at that age. I just know that was how I felt. Um, and, like I said, there was no trauma history there that would explain any of that. So I fully think it's a myth for the most part. I mean, sure, do people have experiences that make them not like trust a certain population? Like, sure, I think that's valid, and I honestly don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, but I don't think that's true for every single person in the LGBTQIA community.
Thank you for that, because that's something that I get. I'm not gonna say I get tired of it, but I keep beating my head up against a brick wall, trying to educate people when questions come up and when statements come up, and it's like, okay, I'm advocating for a specific population. I'm advocating for people, and let's give the truth out a little bit. And so I do appreciate that. Now, you 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 mentioned earlier that coming out might not mean you come out once. It might mean you come out 10 different times. I'm confused on that part, personally and professionally. So
Sure.
help me understand and help the public understand too what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, like I have probably, I would say like sort of like 3 distinct times of coming out. but then, like, every time I meet new people, it's like you kind of have to come out again. So, like, the first time, and this kind of gets a little bit more sad, to warn everyone. So, how my parents found out, for example, like, that was a time of coming out. So I was dating somebody in high school in secrecy, and, like, kind of figuring out, like, what we even were to begin with. I mean, it was, like, one of those early, like, I guess it was junior year, so mid-high school experiences. Um, First time being, like, quote, unquote, "official" with somebody, um, and, obviously, like, I would assume my parents wouldn't have been super thrilled. My mom is, like, full Italian Catholic. um, I mean, she never really verbalized one way or the other. Like, it's not like she said, like, homophobic or transphobic things on a regular basis. So, like, I had just that assumption that she would not be very accepting. Um, but I had a note from the person that I was dating that I had hidden away in my headboard. Like, I had a queen, well, actually, it was a full size bed, but a queen size headboard, that, like, had, like, two, like, kind of shelf things in the middle. There were two drawers. So in one of the drawers, I had this note hidden away. And I couldn't even tell you to this day what the contents of the note were. It was just, something silly. Um, but, my mom found it. And I was in marching band in high school, and I get this, like, weird text, like, towards the end of practice of, like, "Where are you?" And I'm like, "Well, you know where I am. I've been in marching band since 7th grade. Like, this is band practice time." And when I got home, and she kind of sat me on the couch, like, across the room from her, and asked, like, "Do you have anything to tell me?" And, like, I was confused. Like, I had no idea what she was talking about. Like, this note was not even, like, a possibility in my mind. I was like, "No." And then she proceeded to say she found this note in my headboard, and, like, instantly I started, like, tearing up and crying and, like, kind of going into denial mode because I could tell she was not happy about it. And, that happened when I was 16, and, like, I would say it's been, now the next 16 years of my life. I'm almost 32, and we still have not recovered from that moment. And, I think she also made me tell my dad, who is actually a little bit more accepting. Like, if I didn't have my dad and have my older brother, I don't know where I would be, truthfully. But, my dad kind of said he's an old country man. Like, he's not from Lexington. He's from, like, a nearby town, but he comes from a small town. Most people can't understand a word he says because he has a very thick Kentucky accent. But, um, essentially, like, he hugged me and told me he loved me no matter what, which was very much the opposite reaction of my mom. But he pretty much just told me, like, next time hide things better, which I know is not necessarily the best response. However, like, it was actually oddly comforting at the time of, like, I'm allowed to be me, just, like, if I don't want to riff, just, like, be a little bit more sneaky. Which, 16-year-old me accepted that. I mean, 32-year-old me would not really accept that answer as much. So, I kind of went into denial mode, kind of hid it for a very long time. Then I met somebody else. That relationship very much quickly fizzled out. And then I met, like, the person who I dated for the next 4 years of my life. So end of high school through most of college, we decided, and, you know, at that time, my frontal lobe was not fully developed, so I don't know if I would advocate for anyone to do this, but we decided to move in together, because we were both going to the same university. It made a little bit more sense financially. I know a lot of people have that consideration in 2025 as well because rent is crazy. But, you know, my ex's family was gonna help us a little bit with rent with and they were super accepting, like, actually adore that family. My ex and I don't have any communication anymore, but, like, I really, really appreciate that family. They were wonderful. Um, but I had to fully come out to my parents, like, for real, if we were gonna do this. So once again, told my mom, did not go well. And that's, like, when we kind of went into the territory of, like, very, like, low contact with each other. My dad, once again, still accepting, still helpful, still loving. Um, so then that relationship ended, and, I was only out to, like, maybe 3 people, 4 people, including my parents at the time. Um, but, that relationship really the ending of that relationship really, really took a toll on me, my mental health, everything. It was a lot of, like, eggs in one basket type of thing. And, I remember it was my senior year of undergrad, like, I really, really got into writing. Like, I'm actually sort of working on my own, like, sapphic novel as a side project that's not clinical. But writing has always been a passion of mine. And I really got into blogging. I thought, like, these blogs were it. And my very first blog was titled "My Closet's Too Full." Um, and I wrote this essentially kind of coming out piece and posted it on Facebook. And, um, it was like people of that time, who I was friends with, if they decided to click on it, they were curious, then they would read my coming out story. If not, like, I was still in the closet to some extent. Um, but then, that was like 2015. Um, the timeline of this was like 2010, 2014, 2015. Um, then I had like one more big coming out experience, I would say. And this was like 2017. Actually, I feel like it's almost the anniversary of this. And this is like probably my favorite way I've come out so far out of all the iterations I've spoken about. Um, Once again, kind of like after that big moment in 2015, kind of just went back to just living day to day. People who knew, people who didn't know, didn't know. I changed jobs at that point. I was about to no, I was in about to no, I was in grad school at this point. Yes, I was already in grad school. So I had met a lot more new people from 2015 to 2017, and I was working in senior living while I was in grad school. It was kind of a little bit more of like a Christian leaning residence. And that, like, talked about kind of like having like the Chick-fil-A standard. You know, and nothing was like overtly like you have to be X, Y, and Z to work here or anything like that. It was just kind of like just the vibe you got from that job. So like I was also like really scared to be myself because I was working at this job. It was paying my rent while I was in school. Didn't want to rock the boat. And I don't really know like what got into me that made me just like kind of feel tired of living this way again. But there's this wonderful hiking trail that I love in Berea, Kentucky, called the Pinnacles. It has like the most like beautiful outlook. And that's always been my spot. After this bad breakup, I would hike there a lot. I would hike by myself, which I know is not the best idea, but I knew this trail like frontwards, backwards. I knew what to always expect. Not that anything bad can't still happen, but um, I one day, like I just like was like I need to do something. So the thing about the Pinnacles is actually that you don't really have a lot of good cell service. Like you have some at the bottom of the trail. You have a little bit at the top of the outlook, but when you're on the trail, and I think it's about like 2-ish miles, there isn't a lot of cell phone service. Um, so I got this idea in my head and I just went for it. So I hiked to the top of the trail to the outlook, and I kind of made this like long coming out post yet again. but this time it was a status that I knew people would see. And I posted it and knowing I wouldn't have cell service on the way down, so I couldn't, like, back out. Like, I couldn't go and delete it because there was no cell service until, like, I would reach the bottom of the trail. And, with that post, like, not that, like, likes and comments and stuff like that matter, but, like, it had, like, the most likes I've ever had on a post, like 100 something, and just like outpouring of support. And I don't think like coming out made me lose anyone who matters. And that's what I always say to clients too, is that you're not gonna scare away the people who are meant for your life. So I know that was quite the monologue, but those were like some of the coming out experiences. And then kind of speaking to like, what does it mean to come out over and over again? Like I said, like you meet new people all the time. And, like I don't believe like the stereotype that, queer people all have a certain look or, if that person has short hair, they must be gay or that guy's jeans are a little bit too tight, like, maybe he's gay. Like, I don't subscribe to that because I just think people express themselves in the way they want to. So I think people look at me and just assume that I'm very athletic. Like, I still have clients who think, like, I'm married to a man, and I don't necessarily correct them, just because, like, there's certain things with the therapeutic rapport that I do think actually for certain clients it could damage. But when I meet somebody and they're like, "Oh, do you have a husband? Are you married?" Or when I say I'm married, they're like, "Oh, what does your husband do?" Then you have to kind of course correct. Actually, my wife does X, Y, and Z. So it's like kind of like that constant, like everyone assumes we live in a heteronormative world. And I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that, you have to tell people a lot because it comes up a lot.
Wow. And I am amazed and also saddened by some of the, the experiences that you've had. So I have to ask, all right? I have to. How is a relationship with you and your mom now?
So, like, my mom and I, like I said, like, our relationship has been like no or very low contact, literally half my life now. Like, this happened when I was 16, about to be 32. So, half my life, it really hasn't been the best. Like, I choose to believe, like, if something, like, really bad happened, she would be there. But, most of our communication, like, is my poor dad is kind of like the go-between. So, like, my parents didn't attend my wedding. I mean, there wasn't really an invitation to be honest, but um, I've kind of had to come to acceptance, kind of like that radical acceptance, that DBT concept, that this is something that's probably not going to change. And I can't wait for a train that's not coming. So, like, of course, like there are moments where I get sad. Like, I think everyone wants their mom, or needs their mom to an extent, who have had the privilege to have a mom figure in their lives. Like, I think we all desire to have that if we had a healthy enough ish relationship with them. But, like, I can't change her and she can't change me. And I think, like I said, like, if I was hospitalized, I do believe in my heart she would come all the way to New York to be there. But aside from that, like, we don't really have much of a relationship, and we haven't in such a long time. Like, she doesn't even really know who I am as an adult, and, like, I don't know how she is as an aging adult, and that's unfortunate, but like I said, you can't put happiness on hold for people who are not gonna come around.
Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. And I know that's a typical genuine, general response that people get in your situation. So I don't want to sound like I'm a broken record to you.
Sure.
What do you feel like in your experience, needs to change as far as the perception, and to have, I guess, healthier and better outcomes than what you have had in for the most part?
Yeah, I mean, I think like letting people be who they are is like the biggest thing that always comes to mind. Like um I know that there are certain states who feel a certain way about things like books or whatever. And, I think like sure, like I don't disagree that parents should be able to choose what their kids are or aren't exposed to. But my challenge to that is like, Sally in class might have 2 moms. Like, is she not allowed to talk about her family and what that means? Or, like you might see somebody holding hands walking down the street, like 2 men holding hands walking down the street, and like your kid's gonna have questions. And, like, I think, like, having, like, uh, a honest conversation of, like, some families look like 2 moms, some families look like 2 dads, and kind of, like, just, answering questions about what that looks like, I think would solve, like, probably a lot of the problems that we're seeing. I think, like, there's, like, just this villainizing, like, almost caricature of, like, the LGBT community right now. And, most of us are just, working, going to the gym, getting our groceries. Like, we're just like people living lives. And, to like really try to other people, I think is like one of the problems. I think it's just like treating it like some people are right-handed, some people are left-handed. Like, it's not that big of a deal. I think like causing or calling too much attention to something makes it seem like a way bigger deal than it is. So I think like the way to like help people just like live healthy lives is just to acknowledge this is a fact about them and be like, yeah, that's not what their family looks like. And then what do you want for dinner? And carry on.
I love that you said that. We're doing a recording later, and we're actually going to be doing it live. It's going to be on gun violence and violence in general. And one of the things that I teach patients, and not just the patients that I serve, but the things I teach in general, is we're one of the only species on the planet that we're biologically wired to not harm another of its species. And then the question comes up, well, how come we do harm? And so I educate people and just tell them that when we start objectifying another person and and putting them metaphorically here, not as a human being, but as this object, as this thing, that creates the atmosphere for harming that person or that group of people. It creates the when we dehumanize one another, we are not looking at them unconsciously, right? As a human being, as another part, as another brother, sister, whatever, right? And I don't mean like blood brother, blood sister, but we're not looking at them within that type of sisterhood or brotherhood, so to speak. And I think that you are right on that. It comes a point in time, regardless of, right, LGBTQ, whether you're black, white, Chinese, Applejack, doesn't matter. There comes a point in time where we have to learn to humanize other people. At the end of the day, and I love what certain people have said, and I'm not going to mention any names on here, but they have said, and I love the way they would talk about it. And this person was very traditional Christian. And one of the things that that person always said when they got on the LGBTQ conversation. I love it. I couldn't have put it any other way. What people do in their personal lives is on them. It's not for me to demonize and dehumanize and try to control someone's personal life, like however they want to live, like that's on them. And I love that because it really goes back into the fact that at the end of the day, I'm taking all labels off of that person and I'm looking at them as a person. I'm not looking at them as somebody who was lesbian, gay, black, white, criminal, non-criminal. I'm not looking at them with those labels, with that lens on, or with those glasses on. I'm looking at them with the only pair of glasses that I should have and I strive to have as another person who is striving to be a better person every single day to the best of their ability. Sure,
Sure.
they're flawed. Sure, they make mistakes. Sure, they think and feel just like I think and feel. At the end of the day, we're the same inside and out. And that's what I strive to help people get to. Because reality is there's no difference in you and I, your wife and I, and even my best friend who died. There's no difference. I mean, yeah, we can say we're different ages. We can say one of them passed away in 2021, and I'm a male, you're a female, right? But if we're getting away from labels, then what are we left with at the end of the day? And that's the way I do teach part of DBT when I'm doing DBT training. I do help patients to understand that and taking a non-judgmental perspective. And that's really what it is at the core of it.
Sure. And I mean, it also reminds me of like we have so much more in common than we do differences, really. Like going back to like UK basketball as my example, like I'm a huge fan, and I mean, when you grow up in Lexington, like it's almost a sin not to be. But like if I'm in Rupp Arena watching the basketball game with like I don't even know how many people it holds, but say it's a sold out crowd, like I could say like my belief system and who I am is probably different than I would just say like 50% of the people or more. But we have this common thread. We're all here to watch this game and we're all fans and like feeling the same thing about what's going on in front of us in that moment. And there are lots of those, like, I would say, like, common threads in people, when you take away, like, the labels and you're like, "We're all here to watch this artist," or, "We're all here to watch this game," or, "We're all here to eat at this restaurant," like, you have some common ground there, and I think, like, we're so polarized, right now that, like we can find these common things and really enjoy being around each other more. But when people focus so much on labels, that's where this huge divide is coming from.
I couldn't agree more. And I think uh, I think I love the word you use. You said we're so polarized now. And I think that's true. And I don't know how we got to this polarization of you have, regardless of the extremes, even on both sides of the aisle here, where more on the negative aspects here, where if you're living like this, then you're an evil person. If you're like this, then you're not good. And if you're like this, then you don't belong, right? Reality is, I was just talking to one of my first supervisors the other day about this, probably, I don't know, I think it was last week. I think it was Thursday or Friday. And I, I have to agree with what she said that we are all striving to belong, to be a part of. Doesn't matter what you put on that form or that documentation or that ID or what you personally like or dislike. We're all striving to be a part of, and my obligation as another person or as a person in general is to be a part of that solution, not to be that criticizer, not to be the arbiter of anybody's life's decisions, and creating the opportunity or creating the atmosphere. I love that. Creating the atmosphere for people to be comfortable, feel safe, feel loved, feel supported. What do you think for the people who are struggling with coming out? What do you think is needed most in that area?
I mean, I think like safety is like the primary concern. Like, if you feel like you have like kind of your basic needs met, like food, water, shelter, if that's not going to get taken away from you to come out, like I think that's like consideration number one, and even financial safety. But yeah, I mean, kind of goes back to just like people who are going to support you and love you and encourage you and lift you up no matter what. I think like that really is the difference maker. I think like you can um, come out and have a lot of rejection, and obviously that's not going to make you feel very good. So I think it's like knowing who is going to support you and making sure like your basic needs are not going to go away just become because you come out is really important.
I definitely couldn't agree more. So I I have to ask because we see a lot of people, especially on the immigrant level, right? Especially on the immigrant level, where they are coming to the US because in their home country, they are literally death. It's a death sentence if they are LGBTQIA, right?
Mhm.
So, how do we combat that? How do we combat the extremism of or toward the LGBTQ population?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting to know people. I think it's Brene Brown that said people are hard to hate up close. And that's something I really, really think about a lot. I mean, like, especially there are people who in my life think differently than me. Like we almost have like the silent understanding to not talk about certain things. But like I enjoy being around them for other reasons, and I've gotten to know them, and I know at their core who they are. I think it's just like the willingness to sit down and have conversations, because when you get to know somebody, you realize like, oh, they're funny, or we both geek out so much about this thing, or we both like watching basketball. Like once again, it's kind of finding that common ground. But if it's like I'm not gonna talk to them because they're gay, then that's the problem. Or, like, I'll be fair and use the other example, like, I'm not gonna talk to them because they wear a red hat. Like, that's kind of, like, the big divide that we're seeing is, like, not willing to talk to each other, not willing to, like, break bread with the other side. And, there was, like I feel like this was, like, maybe a early 2010s like MTV show that later showed up on Twitter. That was like a Twitter account called like Cross the Line. And it was like cross the line, like if you struggle to fit in, or like kind of just like these like vulnerable things. And you would see so many people like literally on the show like cross the line, and like we all have very similar struggles too, and that doesn't discriminate based on who you are. Like like worrying about whether or not your cancer diagnosis is going to come back positive or negative. I don't know if that's how that works, but using that as an example, like that's a very vulnerable thing. Or like I just got broken up with and we were going to get married 2 weeks from now. Like those are very vulnerable, like human things that we all experience. So it's just like the willingness to talk to one another and to like actually get to know people. Um, 'Cause when you get to know people, you see that they are more than just a label that you've put on them.
So 16 years later, and I appreciate you answering that.
Mhm.
16 years later, you're still finding areas where you have to come out. What are some of the biases that you continue to experience to this day?
I don't know if I necessarily experienced them a lot personally. I mean, just where I am geographically, I think that, it's very normal to see two women walking down the street holding hands or whatever. Something that's like kind of annoying, I guess, is that like everyone assumes like or not everyone, I should say, like some strangers assume like my wife and I are sisters. Like that's like a very common thing that comes up that can be very like weird and awkward. It's like it's usually in the elevator of all places, always in elevators. Where like, I think people try to make sense in their head, like, why are these two people so close? Um, are they like what are they to each other? And, I think it's just like maybe the bias that I experience is just like people just not believing that like two women can be in love with each other. That's something that comes up a lot. And what's kind of like icky in my opinion, but I've had like the opposite with my brother. Like I remember, it was oddly when I was 16, like I guess a lot of things happened when I was 16. We were looking for my first car and the car salesman thought we were married and him and I do look alike. So it's just like what is the deal with that? But like maybe if I were in Kentucky, I would maybe feel differently, but I'm very lucky to live in a progressive area. But that doesn't mean like I'm not considering like safety. And maybe that's another bias. Like I have to look over my shoulder just to make sure like we're not going to be harmed if we're holding hands walking down the street. Um, and, like I don't know if you've watched the documentary, like Matthew Shepard is a friend of mine. And I think that was like a very like I think it was on Netflix around like between 2015 to 2017. I feel like I vaguely remember watching it during that time period. Must have been like 2016 to 2017 because I was in my own apartment at that point watching it. Um, but you know, just like always having to make sure you're safe, I think is one of the most like frustrating parts about being in the queer community, making sure no one's going to harm you.
No, safety is the very most important number one factor there. I definitely would agree with that. And so, what do you think stops people from coming out? And that's just, I guess, a curiosity question, personally and professionally, but also a general educational question too, because there are many people who might live their whole lives and not come out, and they have that burden, they have that overwhelming feeling.
Yeah, I think what stops some people from coming out are a couple different things, like geography probably is a consideration where you are in the country. Jobs, like whether or not you have a more progressive job or a job or a boss who cares or doesn't care. Like I think societal pressure and expectations, like I've watched the show Overcompensating. It's more of a comedy, but it was this guy who wrote this show about his experience. He was like a football player and all these things and like had all these friendships and was concerned about coming out because he would like maybe lose all those friendships. Um so like I think those are some of the things and like of course like uh, different like state things. Like if like Obergefell gets overturned, like I think people are concerned about being safe in their state. Um, I have a friend who recently, is like coming out like to friends and stuff like that. And, after uh like talks about Obergefell being overturned, like I think she's like hesitant to come out publicly. So I think it's just safety geographically where you are, social circles, family, rejection, all those things I do think factor into it. Some people it's truly like a gamble what family you're born into. Do you like and what the belief system of that family is. Some families don't care, some families really do care. So, you know, that's why it's never one size fits all. This is how you come out, because there are so many considerations.
I appreciate you sharing that. And now I have to ask, in the last, I'm gonna say since the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, do you feel like we have made progress at all as it relates to the LGBTQIA population?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think we've made huge progress up until recently. Like, I remember being in high school and, like, there were like a couple kids out here and there, but like most people weren't who I know who are out now. And like I was in high school from 2008 to 2012. And during that time period, like there was like slowly some representation starting to happen. There, I'm trying to think of like what specifically, but I'm blanking. But, like my school had like a GSA, which is Gay Straight Alliance. When I went to college the next year, like my university had like what they called the Alphabet Center, which was like the LGBT center. Um, so like I feel like from like the time I was born, until now, like there has been like s- stair steps of acceptance. Like, we've had like the implementation and then repeal of like don't ask, don't tell, although like kind of hazy where that is right now. But we had that. We had I think like obviously marriage equality. We had the Matthew Shepard Act. I think a lot of people started to feel like they could be who they are after marriage equality was passed in 2015. I definitely have seen like a surge of like acceptance from 2015, really probably until like maybe like the pandemic. I feel like there was like a really steep incline. Like a lot of like companies and corporations were like celebrating Pride Month and stuff like that, which like I have my own like complicated feelings on because rainbow capitalism, not really my thing. But we saw a lot of like increase in support of the community. And now I think we've kind of like gone backwards a little bit, but I definitely don't think we're as far backwards as like the lavender marriages of the '80s and stuff like that.
I love it. And I I can see where some would think that we've backslid a little bit, but there's no but. And I would have to agree that it's always about, I guess the focus should be on continued progress.
Mhm.
Definitely would agree with you on that one. And so what do you think is or are the biggest myths with the LGBTQ population?
I mean, I think the biggest one is, like knowing a gay person's going to turn your kid gay. Like that's not how that works. Reading a book about two penguin dads is not going to influence or indoctrinate your kids. Um, and we're just like I said, like people just living lives. But, I think like just like that we're not human or that we're bad people or whatever else. Like I said, like most time, like you're standing next to somebody and you probably don't even know that they're part of the community. I think we see some extreme exposures online, and like I challenge people to see that as more of a like TV show version of it, not necessarily a realistic version of it. Like some people are more extreme online to get views or clicks or whatever. But we're just, like I said, people living our lives. And I think that people aren't trying to convert people or anything like that, which I know can be another myth. Like we're just here to support anyone who might be coming out. And I mean, I can't speak for the whole community. So I mean, I know I'm here to support anyone who comes out or wants to talk about it. But, like I have plenty of straight friends. I have plenty of uh friends of all different walks of life. And I accept them for who they are just as well as I accept like people who are part of the community. So I don't know if that's necessarily answering the question per se, but I think like at the end of the day, we're all just humans. And I think to think otherwise, like any thought that otherwise would be a myth.
And you actually answered one of my question that I was going to ask, because I've heard that too, as far as somebody who's in that population who's raising a child, they're going to turn them this, that, and the third. And thank you for answering that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what do you, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, I mean, somehow my TikTok algorithm has picked up like this. I think she might be in her 20s, like this girl who makes videos, and she talks about her two moms all the time, um, and she's straight. So I mean, like, just also because like you have two moms or two dads or um, something that's not of the binary doesn't mean like the kids that you raise are automatically going to be whatever. There are plenty of straight kids that come from gay families. There are plenty of gay kids that come from straight families.
Thank you for answering that. I sincerely and humbly do appreciate it. So let's start wrapping up a little bit. I want to know three of the most important questions that you're probably going to be asked today. Okay. If there's anybody who watches this, what is one thing you want them to take away from this?
Yeah, I mean, if there's anyone who is watching this because it's LGBT specific and are just trying to find representation or find some resource that they know they're not alone. I hope that this is that for them, like that they aren't alone. And there are plenty of resources out there for them. And like we have like the Trevor Project. We have there is a trans specific hotline. I know we have like the 988, but there is like also those resources available too, and all of them are valid resources to use. But the biggest takeaway is just that, um, there are people out there and there are going to be people who love and accept you no matter what. And once again, you're not going to scare away the right people for your life.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you. And if people want to see you as a therapist, maybe get you for speaking, anything of that sort, how would they be able to contact you?
So I have a psychology today, and my licensure just a correct, quick gosh, now we're at the end and I can't speak anymore. A quick correction is I'm actually licensed in both Connecticut and Kentucky. New York will be coming next year, though. So I am dually licensed, soon to be triple licensed, and I might also be adding Massachusetts. So if you're currently in Connecticut or Kentucky, you can find me on Psychology Today. I also have an Instagram and TikTok, MindFit Counseling. That's technically the name of my practice, although I've learned recently that there is also a MindFit Counseling in Indiana that has a pretty big SEO presence online. So if you want to find me, probably just look up Kimberly Neat on Psychology Today and I'll pop up.
Thank you for that. And what would be your call to action?
My call to action would be, just to be good humans, like live your life authentically, do good things. I talk about this with my clients that sometimes it's the butterfly effect. Sometimes it's returning the little lady's shopping cart or holding the door for somebody, or if you're financially able, pay for the person's coffee behind you. Like those things make the bigger differences in the world. It's not big acts that matter. It's really the small things. So just to be good humans out in the world, and also just to know that it does get better. My 16-year-old self may not have believed that at certain points, but here I am at 32. And, just keep on going. The tough times aren't going to last.
Thank you for that. I sincerely and humbly, again, do appreciate you coming on. And we've had a lot of great discussion out there. And so, for anybody who is watching this and watches it till the end, there's resources for you. There are resources. So, please utilize any resources that you need. And again, breaking barriers and stigmas on the One Moment podcast. Thank you.